What's good with the YouTube Convicts Perspective? It's your boy Flacco coming with a little bit of energy this morning, live and direct. As you can tell by the thumbnail, man, the title, we're going to be discussing Dual Vocational Institution, D.V.I, also known as Gladiator School. So I'm going to break this down a little bit in 3 different segments for you listeners out there, man. As you guys already know, we discussed San Quentin, Pelican Bay, Corcoran. So I figured we should be discussing another facility that has a lot of significance in history within the prison gang culture as well. So let's start off, man. Okay, what people don't know about D.V.I is it wasn't originally in Tracy. It was originally located in a place called War Eagle Field in Lancaster, California, which was built around, I want to say it opened around 1941, I believe. And or it was being constructed around that time, and it was originally used as a British overseas training place for aviation. That was the sole focal point. Okay, post World War II at that time, a lot of issues were going on out here in California. There was a lot of push for prison reform or juvenile criminal reform for youth. Because up until that point, there was really limited services being offered to inmates or juvenile offenders. And so a bill had passed around, I want to say 1945, 1946. I could be wrong. And it was presented by a senator at that time called Charles Dole. And it was signed into action by Governor Warren at that time of California, I believe. So for the first, I'd say 5 years, they turned this Eagle War base in Lancaster, Eagle Warfield, they turned it into a juvenile offender place where they housed, I think, up to 600 or 800 juvenile inmates at that time. And they focused on different kind of vocational training, right? To help the youth. It was a big thing that had changed it had changed basically the juvenile and prison reform system. Because up until then, there was no type of reform. You were just housed away like cattle, you know. Just you did your time, you did your case, and just people just really didn't have no job trades or no skills that were being offered. So this was a big change. So I want to say around that was open, I think, from 46, 47 to like 53. I could be wrong on these dates. Please bear in mind it's been a long time since I'm going off the top of the head right now. So D.V.I from there was relocated to Tracy, California. It was a new facility that was built at that time, and its primary use was to house youth offenders. That was the whole focal point of this institute. But it was formed as far as in a high power, very confined restraint area to house the most violent and vicious youth offenders, and to actually try to give them some type of training, because at that time they really were trying to. Senator Dole actually had some good agendas for the youth at that time, man. Got to give him a little bit of credit. He was trying to make an effort. But as always, you know how that goes. It became mainly a place for different trades for youth to go into an institution at that time, man. And, it's had a long, extensive history. It's been known as Gladiator School since way back. The amount of history that this facility in Tracy, California has is extensive. You know what I mean? It's gone through a lot. Like you can key on certain areas within the current Chicano gang culture and prison organizations where they played a pivotal role in Tracy. You know what I mean? As we already know, La M, El Mexicano Encarcelado, Mexican Mafia, however you want to label them back in the 50s, there's always going to be a little bit discrepancies in history. We know what the MA had turned into. But this was where its birth was in Tracy, California, around 1957 or 1955. You're going to get some conflicting dates, but if you look at any extensive history sites, a lot of times they say 1957. Weddle Buff Flores, he's the one that pretty much wanted to establish a super gang within a super gang, and Tracy was its roots, where it was founded, and it spread out like crazy, like you know what I mean, from other institutions there. They started to recruit people that were coming in from different communities. You know what I mean? It didn't really matter where your location was. The majority of them were from LA, of course, and surrounding areas. but you had some high ranking Mexican mafia members or MA. I don't know when the title turned from El Mexicano Encarcelado or just MA into Mexican Mafia, but you know, you had like Hatchet was a big figure from San Fran. You had a couple other ones from Sakura. You know what I mean? So this is where their roots are at. You know what I mean? In the youth offender, penal system. So fast track that, man. Tracy, for years, it was one of those places like in the 70s, man, where they would, they started to send a lot of adult offenders. And sometimes you'd have, from my understanding, sometimes they would house a lot of youngsters that were coming from YA. There were YA rejects and so forth. You know what I mean? And around the 70s, I want to say mainly around 75, 76, when the prison administration started to separate individuals from by where they were from, whether they were MA members and associates or NF members and associates. They started to spread out into different prisons. And some of the strongholds for some of these facilities were like D.V.I. was actually known as an NF stronghold back in the late 70s, man. Prior to the CDC validation clampdown. And even when they started to slam down a lot of NF members that they had as members, there were still a lot of sleepers on that yard. You know what I mean? As we've heard from Sundown, there was a lot of individuals that were able to wiggle their way around and put forth for the organization out there because they were sleepers. Ricardo London, Sundown. There's a few other ones. I know a lot of these individuals. I did time with them later on, man. And they were able to be out there on these main lines, up until like the 80s, until they started to get identified. But in the late 70s, it was known as Gladiator School. I think that at that facility at one time, Chino was also a stronghold for the NF, Soledad, and San Quentin was a little bit of mixture. They had everybody separated at that time, man. They had them on different tiers in the late 70s and early 80s. But for a while, man, Tracy was the NF stronghold. They had their own offices. They had their own pool within this institution. Everything was an NF, considered an NF stronghold. If you were an NF member and you wanted to go somewhere, you could do your time where they could make their money, and you didn't have to worry about being victimized or attacked by any type of opposition. Tracy was a spot. You had to worry more about your own people. They were whacking more of their own people at D.V.I. at that time, man. And there's been a lot of individuals that went through there. From Babo, Death Row Joe, Joker, Masilas, all these individuals went through there at one time, to my understanding. So this is where they was literally, their stories of CDC sending AB on buses to D.V.I. and they're at the gates. The NF are there to greet them with some pieces. There's been stories of them actually attacking some ABs actually on a bus. I've heard that within our own history. But things started to change. Within the CDC clampdown, they started to validate a lot of people. And around that time is when they started to organize the XIV structure of Norteños. XIV symbolizing the 14, the 14, you can go through different determinations, but it was basically something that they identified within themselves at the time. The structure meant organized, and Norteños meant that they were a northern race, And there's a little bit of talk about when the first Norteños came about, whether the late 70s or early 80s, but their movement started to take a stronger plight as far as in the 1980s. And that's when, at that time, a lot of NF members were being slammed down and took into the hole in Tracy that were previously out there on the main line. At one time in the 70s, it wouldn't be uncommon to have 150 to maybe 300 NF members out there on the main line in Tracy. That's a lot, in my heyday as far as functioning, I don't think there was any. I think that's probably how many members there was within the whole organization at one time, was maybe 150 to 250. If that. And here you have one facility that had about maybe 150 to 300 NF members, Garnales out there in the yard, man. And these guys were all treacherous and killing machines, man. And they were able to recruit, So, That's will always play a pivotal role in the NF history as far as Tracy being a stronghold and the numerous murders that they were able to commit there. I mean, if you went against the NF or in any way, you were taken off these lines, and it got that reputation for being gladiator school. You know what I'm saying? Up until the 80s, especially in the 80s, when the first North Daniels started to be pushing on that line, man. I've discussed in this because this is something that's it's been put in our history that as the Carnales were being slammed down in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, is when the first wave of Sureños, off the rumors about them saying that the NF were Norteños and that their targets were Sureños. And so a lot of these Sureños were being organized by the MA, and they focused, first in their LA County jail. And this started to go to other areas down south, and where you have the north-south split. And so a lot of individuals started to be victimized, you know what I'm saying, that were just regular raza from up north, you know what I mean? Even Mundo mentions this in his video that he started that rumor. You know what I mean? That they're nothing but a bunch of lame farmers up north. And, you know what I mean? To what did he say? It was just propaganda. You know what I'm saying? To push the MA's agenda. And the NF pushed their own propaganda out there to counterattack the MA's, you know what I mean, position. It was all recruiting basis, but there was no north or south at that time, man. I mean, your tops were still from down south. Babo and Death Row Joe, you know what I mean? As we know, Babo was from San Diego. Death Row Joe was from Oxnard, Chiques area. And there was a whole lot of other individuals like that were strongholds from down south, man. And so, but at that time, the NF started to intervene, and they started to have a mandatory policy in creating these Norteños that were aligning their own type of movement to fight back against the Sureños. And they would go to the Hole and Tracy, and the administration started classifying them as NF sympathizers at that time. And they started to get educated, and they started to implement different policies up there, in K-Wing. For when these Norteños got on the main line to go out there and handle their business, there was a mandated policy. I think it was either 60 or 90 days that you had to come out and take care of business, you know what I mean? And some of these first wave of Norteños at that time, man, were, you know what I mean? Like one of them was legendary. Like Skip's one of the first Norteños, you know what I'm saying, that was out there in Tracy at this time when it was a straight war zone. I mean, Tracy transformed from a NF stronghold into basically a southern stronghold almost at one time. Because there was, at that time, it was just NFMA. And either you were a sympathizer or you were just raza that did your time. All that changed with the creation of the Sureños and Norteños. You know what I'm saying? And even in the late 70s, man, I'm pretty sure, I hope Danny Moore sees this, because Danny Moore's you know what I mean? He was a sleeper at one time, and he was real close to Babo. He's from out that way. In the late 70s, Babo was ready to create a sub-faction. And I think it was called Raza Unida or Raza Primera. I don't know what it was. And it was supposed to counterattack the MA's creation of the Sureños. But at the same time, the reason why it didn't have nothing to do with Norte or Sur at that time was because the NF still wanted to have a recruiting base down south. So a lot of people don't understand that they almost were there was talks in the late 70s about creating that. And there had been talks about creating other things in the 80s before they formed the Nuestra Raza structure. So the Norteños were already present pre-structure, you know what I'm saying, which we give rise to 1984, and it was recreated around 83, 82. There's different years you're going to give, you know what I mean? But the Nuestra Raza the Nuestra Raza expulsion date is also known as January 22nd, 1984. I believe it personally that they were already starting that about a year before. You know what I mean? We already know who wrote the bonds. It was Corny, Copas, Brown Bob, and Mono signed off on them, and a couple other high-ranking C's that had actually signed off on it. This is right after the Civil War split that was going on between the NF that was occurring. A lot of it was occurring in Tracy and San Quentin at that time, man. But let me keep on at this. So that's a little bit of the history about dual vocational institution. So as you can see, it has some of the most significant moments in history, man. From the birth of the MA to it being regarded as one of the strongest NF strongholds ever in history, to it being where the creation of the first Norteños were at. to the different changes that evolved, you know. And it was still a place where they were sending youth defenders up into the 80s. And it was probably one of the most violent areas in the 80s and 90s for North Daniels. Eventually, the North Daniels kind of took it back over in the 90s. And a lot of that had to do with YA, because a lot of their YA rejects were being sent immediately to Dual Vocational Institute. And from there, it eventually, I want to say probably in the 90s, turned into a reception center. For a while, the only reception center up north at that time was Vacaville, and it was like that for years. And then you had San Quentin, then you had Tracy. So in the 90s, it was an established facility. There was a few facilities that were known to be North Daniel strongholds. You know what I mean? Even NF strongholds, which was D.V.I, Solano, Soledad, Quinton. And then you had other places that where people could go and they could be maintained on the main line where the North Daniels had a presence. And what I mean by presence, they can go and do their time. You know, to us in our training, if we have a yard with at least 50, 70 homeboys, and we don't care if there's 200 Sureños, and we're able to do what we want, we have an established yard. So you have places like Susanville back in the 90s, Mill Creek. Mill Creek wasn't always, like you guys don't know, Mill Creek wasn't always SMY. At one time, Mill Creek had a lot of GP yards. I think only one yard was actually no good back then. So when I was going to the system, Mill Creek was a facility you wanted to go to. Soledad. Then you had the emergence of like Pleasant Valley and Salinas Valley and High Desert and all these prisons in Pelican Bay, Corcoran and Tehachapi. These all places had yards where the North Daniels had planted their flag and they were established, man. But Tracy was regarded as a stronghold, you know. It was one place where you could go. And so I'm going to fast track my first experience when I went to Dual Vocational Institute, which I can honestly tell you, man, from my experience, this was one of the most, how you say it, chaotic prisons I've ever been to as far as reception centers. You know, I've done a lot of time in Queen Mas, in Quinn. I've held authority positions there. You know what I'm saying? I've worked with, you know, I've held the RSD position. I've worked with the RC, numerous RCs over there, numerous carnales. And there was a lot less issues over there in Quinton than there was in Tracy. Quinton always ran pretty smoothly. We always had a pretty good relationship, even with the COs over there, to where they, besides IGI, which was the gang coordinators, they didn't mess with us too much. So when I got to Tracy, I just came from Santa Rita, and I stepped into a pod over there, and it's a little different in Santa Rita. There was no communication with the main line and stuff, you know what I mean? So when I went through there, you know what I mean, I quickly stripped the person who was trying to run the place because it wasn't up to par. They didn't have no, it was terrible there, man. And I started lacing up a few youngsters, and I started to conduct a few investigations when I was there. I was investigating a city councilman's son, you know, Ignacio, not Cifuentes, De La Fuentes. I mean, because he had a serious case on his jacket, man, and I was trying to exploit that for some advantages for the regiment out there on the street, because I was in contact with the streets at that time. And at that time, his dad was running for mayor, and I was trying to see where this could be, what leverage we could use if I could help clear this dude, or not clear him, but at least try to utilize his situation, man, because his case was pretty self-explicit, man. You know what I mean? He was out there running around getting them prostitutes, man, and he was not paying them and doing what he wanted to with them, abusing them. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I was looking at that. So I had all these issues and stuff, and there was a couple other people there, you know what I mean? And some issues from the streets that was going on. You know, one thing when I used to get locked up, if you have money out there, you got to react on it. You have to stay on top of it, and you have to communicate, man. So I was trying to communicate all my business as best I could when I was in Rita before I got to wherever I was going. So they ended up sending me to Dual Vocation Institute. I think I had maybe a 9-month flat sentence or something like that. I forgot what it was. You know what I mean? It was different back then. When you get a parole violation, man, it was basically like a new term. It was basically like you were doing a 16-month or 2-year term. They could just hold you for forever, man. You know, and at that time, I think 60 months, you would do 10 months and 20 days. So I did a couple violations that were basically terms back then, man. It was very corrupt and abusive system, man, to where you had no rights until they started changing things with the Valdivia and all that, man. They started giving you attorneys and you had rights and due processes, man. They had to put a hold, they had to hear it within 72 hours and this and that, or they had to release you. But I went through it when it was just mercy, and they could just keep you there for 4 or 5 months with no hearing. So I get to Tracy, and I try to sneak out to the reception line because sometimes they don't have the receipt file. So they put me in a regular block when we get off the thing, and I'm meeting some individuals there. A couple of them I knew. One cat from Mountain View. I knew Flacco from Mountain View. I think it was Flacco or it was someone else, man. Because his brother or his cousin or boy had my lowrider. I had a 91 Fleetwood Cadillac, man, tight, some rims, beat and everything at that time, man. And I had let him use it for a little bit, and so I was trying to relocate the car while I was locked up because you know how that goes, man. People kind of forget where you're at. So I get there, they eventually slap me down, and I'm okay. I already knew they were, so they put me in J-Wing. And so I'm tripping off this stuff, man. I'm there's no homeboys around me or anything. And this is the overflow AdSec at that time. I don't even know I think it may have been like, I don't know if it was a regular reception, but I'm just trying to peep everything out. And I'm noticing back windows are open. You can see the other side and, but there's no communication, man. And I already knew it was wherever I was at, it was a temporary housing place. You know what I mean? I knew I was going to eventually get to K-Wing. So they come up to my cell and they ask me, we got a roommate for you. He's a northerner. And they go, but he's black. Will you take him as a roommate? I said, yeah, I'll take him as a roommate. I'm not tripping. Like, what does that have to do if he's black or whatever? You know what I mean? He's a North Daniel. He's my people. So I signed the waiver and they moved me to L2. And so at that time, it was a little bit different. Quinn would only put validated members. Tracy would put anybody. If you came to the hole and you were a northerner and you wanted to go to the yard 4, they would put you out there. So I get in there, man, and sure enough, man, the dude's name was Casper from Stockton, from VLL. Man, he was funny as hell, man. If you looked at him, you would think maybe he was an old school BGF member. You know what I mean? And he was a little bit of a cat, man. He was on them hot meds, and he'd be like stressing off his medication. Like, I need my medication. He'd be like, you know what I mean? And he goes, otherwise I'm gonna start seeing you little green people. And he was kind of a cat, man, but he was cool, man. I liked him. He had some story, man. He was telling me his family were BGF, but he was straight North Day, VLL. He told me, you know what I'm saying? Casper, and I don't know why they called him Casper, except because he was dark as hell, man. And man, at that time in L2 it was funny. I guess he came from Susanville for getting off in a riot, man. I mean, he paroled and came back. So in L2 they run ICC and they put like little chairs in front of the door, right? So I said, man, we're gonna play with these woods at that time, man. I remember there was a high power Wolfpack member right in front of me named Jeremy Jones, man. Jeremy Jones is with the business, man. And he was always respectful, offering some tobacco and stuff for me, you know what I mean? And I just peeped game on him. I go, man, he's laced up. I could tell, man. I didn't know who he was till later on, man. But I would always watch his conduct and character, man. I seen that this dude was, either brand LOR or strong sympathizer. At that time, I guess the Wolfpack wasn't having issues with the brand or anything like that. They were still in good standards. I guess things had changed. But he was right in front of me. But these woods would come back and forth, and I would go there, and I had a shaved head, man, skinny as hell back then. And I'd go to the door, and these woods would look at me, man. It'd be funny as hell, man. They'd be like, all right, like that, with their little thing. You know what I mean? They're all shackled up and stuff, whatever. I don't know how they did it. They try to give me a fist bump or whatever, like a nod. And I'd be like this, all right, you know what I mean? And I'd back up, and here would come Casper, man, dark as hell, man. You know what I'm saying? All you would see was a dark figure, and then when he'd smile, you see his teeth. You know what I mean? So he'd come like that, and he'd go like this and stuff, man. They would be looked at shocked, like, what's going on over here, man? So I was in L2. I started sending some missives to K-Wing, telling them I'm there, and you know what I mean? I didn't know if this was who was there or what, man, because there was no type of communication with Tracy at that time, man. This was a facility where mainly if you were from the Valley, Stockton, Sakura, this is where people had communication, you know what I mean? And I was trying to see if there was any Garnales there or any, who was there that I may know that would know me, because I had some stuff that I needed to get to the Bay. And I forwarded some stuff, man. And next thing you know, that dude ended up like, he got rid of it, man. Like, what the hell did you get rid of it, man? Like, this was all authentic material that needed to get to the Bay, man. This was all like critical issues, man. And I get there though, and I find out that it's just one dude that's running the place, man. And so I'm peeping everything out, and I'm trying to get acclimated to my environment. And I tell them who I am, and I'm trying to see how everything is operating and running. I mean, their programming. It had the base security procedures, but the first thing I noticed was it was a lot of youngsters, man. There was a few old timers that were there on the yard, and that were older bros that they started getting at me when I got to the yard because they knew who I was, man. And they started to get into my ear, like, you know what I mean? And I'm just like, when people start to complain about a facility, I take it at face value because there's a lot of people who instigate and they get jealous. You know what I mean? And they want to be the one that has a pivotal role, or they want to be the one that change it. And maybe they felt that maybe I would intervene and put them in some type of position or this and that, man. And I'm not that person, man. I got to sit there and do my own due diligence and investigation. And so dude was set to parole that had the place, and he goes, man, I got to leave this place to you, of course. And I'm like, yeah, I already know. So he ran down the program, and these codes that they had established with the facility, man, were like, they've been using the same codes for a year because I went through all the Binta logs. You know, each RA would have a Binta log, and everything was backtracked, I think, from like maybe like 4 or 5 years. And it had every incident that happened, every removal, every hardcore discipline, every freeze, every investigation, every clearance. But everything had been missing for a year, so it like had limited information, and there was no one there. I was able to see who was left in charge and all this stuff, man. So I had to have everything refiltered, restructured. And the first thing I did was I started sending different directives out there to the reception center at that time, man. And Tracy was a little bit different, man. You know what I mean? I got moved to K-Wing. I forgot to say that. And it was bars, and it was 3 tiers, and it was kind of like level tiers. Like you had the first tier was by itself, and then the second and third tier were together. You know what I'm saying? And the way we used to fish is we used to make these little balls and stuff, and then you roam down the tier, and it kind of was a trip, man, compared to normal fishing, man. But it was simplified, and the hole was had a little bit less people because all L1 section is where they had all the PCs and stuff like that, man. And the water was terrible. I tripped on that. The water was straight like brown, man. Tasted like crap. It was so bad, man. You know what I'm saying? Then you had little mice coming out the back of your toilets and stuff like that, man, through the little cracks and crevices at night. I would wake up and, my butters would have holes in them, and my soup bags I'd have to put my stuff up as high as I could. So Tracy, man, it was not a clean facility, man. And we had that one cop named Pinder, whatever his name was, man. He would literally chase after lines, man. That was his thing. He loved to get fishing lines, man. He would sit there at the end of the tier and wait. So when he would be on, man, I had to change everything to where, like, we're not going to fish if he's on. We're going to wait. You know what I'm saying? Let's if it's, as far as to myself, because all hot business was going to me, I'd rather wait and get this information later on, because we used to fish. We'd shower on both sides. There's the west side and east side of Kaling, I believe. And so you would fish with different sides. And that's how I'd get with us from the backside, because for a while, if we tried, they used to put us on 2 separate yards. A 4 yard, I'm going to go into that. They had 2 different yards. One side's this side, one side's that side. And if you tried to go and pass with us, they were putting people on potty watch. So we had to be very discreet in how we passed these misses. So we would do all communications. Like I'd have to get my weekly reports or any type of wheelas that were coming from the reception center, because I actually opened a good line of communication with the reception center at that time. We had a lot of stuff coming in, man. I'd have to wait till we showered on certain days, and that's how we pass our missives. When you get to the shower, I had certain codes that we would say, and then that would let them know that we had wheelers going. But let's go into how the yard was. So when you go into Tracy at that time, man, it was a trip, because the security procedures were totally different, man. I mean, when you go to yard, you'd have to do this crazy thing, man, to where you would basically almost have to strip down. You'd have to show your ears, you know what I'm saying, show your hands, pull down your socks, go through your waistband, right? Do all this stuff, and then you'd have to walk through these 2 security posts, and you'd have to open your mouth, and you'd have to keep your arms in front of you. than you get in your formation. I thought it was a little bit extreme. You know what I'm saying? It was totally different than Quinn, to where, well, the first day, of course, you have to go out there with your shirt off, and you have to submit your tattoos again. So then we can forward who's coming out to the security post. If you're a threat, if you're welcome to the yard and whatnot. We'd always put filters that we'd have a new arrival come to the yard, and we'd tell them who they are and all that right before the thing. And so that's the thing I noticed with that, man. It was a trip, because they had our yard right next to where the PCs were at. You know what I'm saying? L1. So they used to run their mouths while we were doing machine, and they used to try to throw piss on the yard, and they used to call out our names and our information. And these dudes knew a lot of information, man. Like, they started naming the chain of command. I just got there and I was being discreet within, like, and they started saying, oh, that I was the one that was in charge, and I'm the one that had this person removed and that person removed. And, you know, they were doing their homework. They were paying attention, man. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them dudes I knew from years before, man. So I restructured the whole program. You know what I mean? I changed every unit. I gave every unit a section, you know what I mean, household, whether it was the main line, the ranch. I think they had everybody housed, I think at that time, in L3, I think at that time, as far as the main line. Then they had the regular main line. I started giving everybody, all blocks, different codes. I wanted weekly roster reports. I wanted everybody's status. I wanted all that submitted, but I had certain codes I reestablished. I sent 2 misses out. I sent one with the codes first and foremost, and then another one I sent out with all the established facility codes. You know, I gave everybody baseball teams at that time, and I think I had a 1 through 27 coded, and this was just supposed to be for certain people out there. And then I had someone in charge as far as for the whole reception side. They were in charge of all the different blocks, units, and each one that individually have a different unit, like unit commander, you know, whatever position they want to call them, RAs, squad leaders. You know, title, that never really would bug me what title people used. You know what I mean? As long as you were following the chain of command and answered the K-wing. So that was my first thing, was to get everybody up to par, because no rosters were coming in, no reports, and there was a lot of people at that time that were being recruited as North Daniel Soldados, and our members, who their statuses weren't being honored. They didn't go through the proper process. The NF member that actually sanctioned it didn't had their status revoked, and what that means is that their status was just never done right. You know what I mean? It would be nothing negative on their career. It was revoked because there was a lot of conflict going on with the Black Widow situation and the chain of authority that was going on. And there was also some new implementations being enforced that I was privy to, about stripping individuals of their status that weren't honoring Bond 13 and putting fines. So I was trying to line all communications with the Bay or with the streets to where to submit these fines. And I was, you know what I mean, for people who are violating Bond 13. And, you know, the law's the law. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've said that over and over again. So if people weren't honoring that Bond 13, and they had three different occasions, and they were insolados, I was stripping them of their status. There was nothing they could do about it, and I was submitting that to the Bay. Didn't have no issues with that. Everything was honored. The only thing I was having issues with was where to send the fines, because it was a $200 fine at that time for not honoring Bond 13. So I restructured the whole facility, and I had everything operating up to par, man. I mean, I had to call a couple removals when I was there, man. You know what I'm saying? One of the removals I had to call was the individual from out there from my way, and he was speaking on C business, and he was disrespecting a certain C, as well as there was a personal vendetta between me and him over some stuff, man. And so I had him removed off top, submitted that to the Bay, and I submitted every report that necessary. What I used to do is, when I made certain decisions, I would have everything Xerox, and I would file my investigational packet, and then my decision, the disposition of the case. And I would process that for a higher authority review, which meant it was going to a higher authority up either in the Bay or Corcoran, to where they could put their final stamp on it. And that's how you submit it. You know, when you do proper R&I, research and investigation, you'd submit your whole report, and it'd have to be nothing but facts. And I'd have exhibits, which would be other additional reports. Okay, I'd get reports from other soldados that heard this and that, and I'd make sure that it was the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why. The same way that CDC would write their investigational reports when a melee would go down, is the same way we would write our reports, and I'd render a disposition Or if I couldn't render a disposition, you know what I mean, which there was a couple issues, I would just submit it to a higher authority. Therefore, it can get in front of brass, and they can make a decision if they want to continue to investigate it, leave the issue, or just have it as a backlog, as a cross reference. Because there was a couple situations. There was a Chino from Saho, and there was a youngster from Lathrop at that time, where the youngster claims that Chino, who was an NR member, threatened him with a razor blade in the cell. I believe the youngster because this individual Chino had a kind of shady past. You know what I mean? But there was not enough factual information to deem Chino no good. You know what I'm saying? As much as I felt like he was trash, and I believe this youngster, because the kid was only like 19, 18 years old, there's no reason for him to lie, man. The dude pressed up on him and threatened him in the cell. But there was no one else to prove it. It was his word against the other person. So I couldn't stamp or validate it. So I got all the reports and I just submitted them to the Bay. You know what I mean? Saying I can't render disposition. This is, you know what I mean? But there was other things to where I had certain people hit. You know what I mean? That was one of them. The other one was I mentioned this one. Well, let's go into what happened with the wolf packs. We had caught word of missive about them having a planned attack because they ended up sending a kite to the wrong person. And their conduct in the tier towards us had changed. And there was an incident that happened in Solano where they had got off, the homies in the skinheads, you know. I guess a homie had got thrown off the tier, but there was a couple times where the skinheads got the business from the homeboy. It was cracking off out there in Solano. And for some reason, they were trying to push that agenda right there in Tracy. And the Wolfpack were basically, they were just starting to establish themselves, and they were doing a lot of bidding for the Aryan Brotherhood, man. So I had imposed a mandated green light on all Wolfpacks that they were to be removed by bloodshed, that they weren't going to walk our main line there. For one, for them doing the AB's bidding, for trying to be a political movement, they were a threat. I mean, this is our stronghold. Tracy's always been known. We're going to push these lines, which I just got communication from actually none other than Dancing Bear. Dancing Bear tried to send me a missive about some dude named Smiley about how he was disrespected and Tracy and this and that. And I sent a wheeler back to Dancing Bear talking about, man, you know, this is reception center. It's a revolving door, man. Who was here 6 months ago isn't here no more. I'm here. And I said, you know, you need to pump your brakes. So I kind of came at him a little aggressive. I probably, you know what I mean? But it is what it is, man. You know, but I try to do it as respectful as I can. I just didn't like the way he sent that kite. You know what I mean? And so we ended up and there was a couple people out there that needed to be sent to the hole, man, for their certain conducts. A couple people who didn't honor bond number 13. One dude was on freeze for trying to establish a Modesto Regiment crew that wasn't sanctioned. Little man from Patterson. So I had certain individuals that I had to get back there to the hole to get their investigational reports and submit them where I needed to submit them. And so when we imposed this green light, first I had the one dude removed, and then second, I wanted them. It was basically for us to remove all targets. And anytime you move on any group faction, whether they're white, black, Sureños, if you're just trying to remove targets, which that's the only reason why. Anybody knows, like when an NLR would touch down on our yards, we would remove them. And it would kick off a riot. Same thing happened here. So they booked a few of them. They got it bad. They went in. I told them I didn't want no tomahawks, that I wanted some I wanted some pieces to move on them. And so this happened around, I think, July of 2006. They moved on them, and it kicked off a riot in the process. And there was a homeboy, Monster Cisco from Susanville, who was a bro, who started getting jumped by about 5 skinheads, man. Maybe more than that. I don't know the exact number, 3 to 5, 7, I don't know. And other people were getting off, and there was these 2 dudes from Santa Clara. And instead of engaging, I mean, they were like maybe 10 yards away, which is within striking distance. Maybe even closer than that from the report. And and one of them had a K number, one of them was a first termer. The dude elected to get down and not get involved. And homeboy was getting jumped. And it got worse and worse, man. He had just booked about 2 dudes. And that's a cowardice act. That's not defending the household. You know what I mean? I get it if you're on the whole other side of the yard. You know what I mean? You can't get over there. But if you're present and you see your own gente getting rushed, because when we send squads, we would send like maybe the proper way to do a serious hit removal like that. We would send our bomber, our hitters in there to hit the targets. I think they hit maybe 3 or 4 people at that time, because there was 3 or 4 of them left on that yard that were wolf packs, that were targets. And after you hit them, you have the additional bombers come in, a wave of at least like 5 or 6 people, because you know it's going to kick off. And so this ended up kicking into like a bigger melee than that. So if you're present when it kicks off like that, the whole thing is to get the targets off the yards without endangering your own gente, without endangering your numbers. So if we could send maybe 6 dudes to rush 30 people and 40 people, we get all those dudes off the yard, then we won. But sometimes it kicks off longer. And if you're present, you're expected to get off. If you're close to the proximity and you see your gente being endangered and jumped, you get off. You don't lay down. The dudes lay down. Cowardice act. And so we had confirming reports, so I had dude removed. Next yard, I sent a message to this cat named Scarface from San Fran, and there was a certain code that I had that I was able to give it verbally. I was able to give the code verbally while the PCs don't know what's going on. Next yard, the day he got hit. You know, next individual I had to have hit was an individual named Silent from Stockton. And the reason why I had him hit was because he was in the hole, and he ended up getting a brother's address to communicate. And brother named Chuco from Southside Stockton. Chuco's been a bro for a long time, pretty seasoned individual. You know what I mean? Probably in his 60s now. He's one of the first wave NR members, I believe, at that time. You know what I mean? Or close to, pretty close to it. You know what I mean? And no, not that close. But yeah, he's been an NR member for a while. And so he started trying to write years before. Tried to write homeboy's stepdaughter, who was only 15 years old. That's no good. Those letters were cross-referenced. They were cross-checks, and at that time, that dude had been deemed no good by Peanut from Stockton, Charlie Oaks. Lo and behold, we didn't know Charlie Oaks was still in good standings at that time, and so I was able to get confirmation that dude was no good by Charlie Oaks Peanut, and so it was all justified. I mean, that's one thing I have no remorse for, is anybody who tries to engage in any type of activity like that, man. So dude got removed next yard. And so that's how that yard was, man. We had everything established, man. We had a little bit of run-ins with the I had a little issue with the BGF at that time, because they had a melting pot. You had the Bloods, you had Crips, you had Bay Area Card, and you had BGF all on our group yard. You know what I'm saying? And there was a dude named Sekou, Shorty Rollins from Oakland, old-time BGF cat, man. Kind of a headache. He tried to get at me in a kite, all crazy. You know, you put us in harm's way. Why didn't you give us any information that you guys were going to do a removal? And so I got at him straight up. I told him, check this out, bro. I said, you've been in the system how long? I go, it's not like that no more. I mean, why are we we don't even tell our own people when we're going to do a removal. Why are we going to tell you guys? For you got a bunch of misfits on the yard that don't know how to act. Right? Who may go breach security or may act different on the yard and let our target know. Because I also had to have that individual Chino from Antigua removed for acting like a J-Cat, for threatening to come to the yard with a piece and talking about that he had low frequency waves in his head. He was a threat, man. And he made some comments that were threatening towards people, and he was disrespecting other races, and he was acting like a J-Cat, man. He was all in that dope on the streets, and I had to have him removed. He had been an NR member for a long time, man. And so I thought maybe he was kicking that dope, so in order to ensure him maybe due process for get-backs, I removed him physically. You know what I'm saying? And submitted the reports on his behalf, because he had a long, extensive history. And I felt like the dope, he was coming off some dope pretty bad, man. When you're talking about that they're using low radio frequency waves to play with your head, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And then you're talking about that you listen to a pirate station and all this stuff, and that, you know what I mean? And he came back after we had him removed. He ended up getting out, man. And he came back for calling the Manteca Police Department, saying that he had a bomb and he was going to blow it up. And so he actually came in after he got out, man. I had to have him removed a couple days before he went home, because he was a threat. You know what I mean? He came back for that. We just cut him off, man. He was just too much of a J-Cat. People who had known him for years were like, man, you weren't lying, because a couple people questioned the call that I made. And when he came back, it was a whole different thing. And, some of the brothers I was there at that time was with Joel Travieso Ramirez, from Modesto. I ended up leaving him in charge when I left. He was my understudy. There was another individual, Hoodlum from Sakura was there, who I've known for a while. Top from Vallejo, I've known him for a while. Trying to think who else was there. Yeah, there was a whole bunch of brothers there that I knew, that I'd done time with, man, that knew me. You know what I'm saying? Shadow from Sunnyvale, Chuku from Stockton. And there was a couple people there. I started to take under their indoctrination as far as Norte and Soldados. I recruited 2 people while I was there. You know what I'm saying? And gave them a couple of sponsors to start working with them. And, Tracy was a trip, man. It was very, very high volume activity, man. A lot of stuff was going on there. They were, not only that, man, they were targeting us a lot. You know what I'm saying? They were signing us and putting us on potty watch illegally, looking for any reason to put us on potty watch, man. Whereas before, when I was in San Quentin, we had a good relationship, good rapport with the staff there. There was respect. In Tracy, they started doing faulty stuff, man. After we did that serious riot, you know what I'm saying? There was rumors that, that some people almost lost their lives and all kinds of crazy stuff, man. I didn't read anything like that, man. I know a couple of people got helicoptered out of there. And I know that they caught the wheeler that was going to the bay that was talking about that I'm the one that ordered it, because they came and got at me. And they were talking about that this is going to take years for them to clean up. And, it's kind of hard, because it's like we were implementing just a policy to remove these people, but it became a race thing when it wasn't supposed to. That's the nature of doing politics and business. If you want to remove certain targets, then it's going to turn into a race thing. So I had ordered a stand down motive. Unless they pose a threat, we're just to stand down. And but the staff, they started doing some faulty things. They brought in like 3 or 4 homeboys that looked like they were Weddle, you know what I'm saying? And they brought them into the cafeteria, and they had 50 white dudes, man. And they came in, they got jumped. And they got the business. Then they stabbed an old man. The whites stabbed an old man who was in a wheelchair. You know what I'm saying? So there's ramifications of war, man. And that's what was going on. There was also a whole bunch of other melees and stabbings that occurred in the process of all this going on, man. So Tracy was crazy, man. The staff were real corrupt. They were setting people up. There was a high volume of overturn rate, but when I left, the facility was pretty much up to par. We'd also got some kites from Tehachapi Shoot from some dude that was mad about when Chino got removed, man. And I had to send some kites up to Tehachapi at that time, man. I kind of was pushing the envelope there, man. You know what I'm saying? Telling them to pump their brakes too, man, which was probably, I didn't get no backlash for it, though. I'll tell you that, because I did it in a respectful fashion, because everything I said, I was right. You know what I mean? You're allowing, this dude is communicating with this facility without sanction and permission. And he's speaking on our facility without any type of knowledge. And everybody knows that these reception centers are a revolving door. There could be no one here at this facility, and then 2 weeks later, a high-ranking C could come through and have this whole facility up to par. The prison was up to par when I left it. When I got there, it was tore up, man. And I left it in good hands. I left it with Travieso. So when I ended up going from there to Corcoran, I was able to submit all my reports, everything got honored, because I knew the RC at that time in Corcoran pretty well, which was Sylvester Gomez Silver. So everything I pretty much listed, he pretty much honored as well. You know what I'm saying? And he said he submitted them wherever they needed to go up to the bay, which I used to cover myself anyways. The one thing I learned about prison politics and decisions, if you're in an authority position, you have to cover yourself. So I would have everything Xerox. I would make sure I would send out multiple kites to the bay, just to make sure that it touches down in case anything gets intercepted or anything gets thrown away, that at least gets to where it needs to go. But this is my experience with Dual Vocational Institute, man. As I said, it has a long, extensive history, man. It was a wild place. It was crazy. I had a lot of good times there too, man, when I was there, man. Like, we got drunk for, September 16th, and we got hella drunk in the chair, man. And we started doing cadence at we should have all got disciplined. All of us, man. Because I allowed us to drink, and we made a hardcore batch, man. And the other side did too, man. And we were all like, can't stop, won't stop, and all this stuff, man. We were too drunk, man. So things do. That's the one fun experience that we had. We had little handball tournaments while I was there for that weekend. I met a lot of good dudes from the Valley, man. Because a lot of times you get too accustomed to being in where you're from. You know what I'm saying? Where which would be the Bay Area. And so I could go to San Quentin at any time, and there's going to be about 15, 20 people I know immediately there in the hole. Whereas when I got to DVI, maybe there was one or two that I knew. You know what I'm saying? And it's the same thing with them. They were all had a revolving door. So a lot of them, when they first got there, they were kind of tripping off me. You know what I'm saying? A little bit. They didn't like that they had someone from outside that had the authority there. You know what I'm saying? Person. But they got to know me. And I gained a relationship with people like Chuco, with Travieso. And it was all business, man. It was all positive push that we were pushing there, man. We had a good working relationship, man, with a lot of people. And anytime you can take a facility that's known to be a stronghold and it turns into shit and you're able to get it on track, it feels good, man. You know what I mean? It feels good when you're a part of that, man. And that's what we did in D.V.I Vocational Institute, man. We got that whole facility up to track, man. And we had a lot of things kick off, man. And I used to trip on it, man, because there's two places I used to trip when I used to go, or three. But more so Quentin and Tracy, because Quentin, there's so much history there. Alpine section, you know what I mean? I think I was on the 5th tier where everything kicked off, you know what I mean? The whole, you know what I'm saying, yard 6 back in the days. Walking around, this is where all you know what I mean? Everything kicked off back in the days, you know what I mean? Tracy. This is where the MA started. This is where NF had a stronghold. This is where the first North Daniels came from, you know what I mean? Allegedly, the first time the North Daniels killed in opposition was at that facility too, as well. That was in the history. So this is my spill on D.V.I Vocational Institute, man. There's probably a whole lot of stuff that I missed out on, man. But I figured we touched on the Bay, we touched on Corcoran, we touched on all these locations, man. I figured I would touch on D.V.I Tracy a little bit, and this is my experience from when I went there, man. I went through there and I ended up being the authority in charge. You know what I'm saying, and I was there for a while. I actually caught at 115 as well. I didn't discuss that. When we had to remove that dude Chino, almost the whole yard had to take off on him because dude had hands. And they tried to roll me up in that and try to take me off the yard. And I ended up beating it in a 115 hearing. First time I had a 115 hearing, 115 to where I beat like that, man. It was kind of good. I felt like I had some justice, But there's a lot of stuff going on, man. You know what I mean? A lot of stuff I've left out. You know what I mean? Certain people that were deemed no good. But a lot of times people were just laying it down at that time. It was when I started seeing the new trend of people that were going SNY. People started to lay down a lot more. And so there was a whole different mindset. People were saying, look, I'm done. And you'd be like, wow. They were active like for weeks. Next thing you know, they no longer want to function. And they would just immediately move these people to L1. And eventually I think they had them all in L2. And so the same people that were there in your household, a week later, they'd be gone. And so the codes had to continue to change. And it was like, man, on the tier, we'd have like 6, 8 homeboys. And then over there in L1, they'd have a whole tier of all dropouts. It was a trip, man. So that's when I started to see the change that man, this whole thing is becoming different, man. People are just walking away, man. And they were making it easy. As soon as they walked away, they were going to ICC that week and they were being moved. But just a little bit of history of D.V.I, Tracy. You know what I mean? A little bit of experience, as you guys can know. It's been around for years. It's Gladiator School. It's one of those places that just always kicked off no matter what, man. But I've been on here for about an hour. You guys all have a good morning, man. Stay positive, stay productive, and be safe.